The Solitaire series, episode 36, The Seven of Clubs, by Troy Lambert, narrated by Troy Lambert. What the hell? Preston, a thin man with a tiny mustache and a much larger intellect, asked. A slim finger pushed his glasses back onto his nose and into place. He was much more comfortable with spreadsheets and computers than field operations, even when he had two large men with him to handle the heavy work. How did they all get here before we did? The tracker app on his phone showed a bright dot hovering over the house across the street and slightly in front of them. He and one of the two men who'd arrived with him stood behind the large SUV they'd driven here to strategize and wait for the third man to return from a quick surveillance walk. There seems to be a convention following Jack in that house. The large man showed up. He pointed at the building across the street. He turned to point at another house closer to the group. In there, we have shots fired and at least two solitaire hotshots and some new guy. Who knows where he is from? There's a woman in there, too. How do you know that? A little birdie told me. Preston didn't want to know who or what the little birdie might be. Ace isn't going to like this at all. Preston looked up from the device in his hand to the house Jack appeared to be in, to the one he'd just been told about. Does it matter what he likes? Both of his escorts/assistants towered over him, but the one who seemed to have taken the role of spokesman was the wider of the two by far. He seemed relaxed, almost too relaxed. Who owns the house he went in? Do we know? It's a home surgery clinic, undercover doc known as Dr. Larry. Untouchable by anyone. It's a strict rule. He helps everyone for the right price. The man who'd stayed put answered this time. He was staring at something he was reading on his phone as he answered. Technology. Apparently he'd tapped into some dark web version of Wikipedia for bad guys. But we can go in? Ask questions? Preston asked. The large man shrugged. Listen, it is easy for you to take this in stride, but this is important, don't you see? Important. He trailed off. This was more important than either of these gentlemen could know. Whoever found whatever Jack had would solidify their position as the leaders of the Vegas underworld and the overworld. Gambling was a legitimate business. So was collections, as long as no one went too far or everyone did to the same extent and followed the same rules. The rules were set by those who were paid to look the other way, or to help those who didn't want to look the other way see the light. There were no secrets anymore, not any that couldn't be uncovered and used. Except for Jack and some of those who were part of the goddamn Solitaire. He didn't like it. His boss Ace didn't like it. But the secret was a fact. They had a choice. They could either expose Solitaire's secret and blow the organization apart, or they could steal it and make it their own. Since it was worth millions, maybe more, Preston knew Ace's preference, and his as well. He would get a healthy cut of whatever his boss received. What do you want to do? The smaller of the two large men asked. Preston realized he'd been lost in thought, and the two men were now looking to him expectantly for a decision. He could call Ace, but Preston was the one on the ground. He had eyes on the situation. Ace was likely to tell him just that. The situation was, well, what? Exactly. Jack was in one building, a surgeon's place. There were a few individuals in another house watching, but something had happened. Shots had been fired, so he had been told. That meant someone was out of the game. Was someone inside with Jack? A large SUV sat right out in front of the surgery, so it seemed likely. The surgery, a full frontal attack with possible hostiles following versus a quiet entrance after he either enlisted those in the house to his side or killed them. This seemed like his only choices. Let's go to the house, he said. We need to know what we're up against before... He tilted his head at the surgeon's office. Got it, the large man said. Let's do this. The first man slid a semi-automatic pistol from his shoulder holster and checked to make sure a round was in the chamber. His partner followed suit. Then each checked their backup weapon, a small revolver and a concealed holster at the small of their back. The smaller of the two knelt and checked yet another weapon, a knife in an ankle holster. Jesus Christ, what are you expecting in there? Preston asked. The unexpected, the man replied simply. Preston shook his head. How do you think we should handle the approach? My bet is, even if they don't know we're here, they probably expect trouble, so it's probably best to give them what they don't expect. What would that be? You're going to knock, politely. He opened his mouth to protest, but quickly realized this was the answer. Let's go then, he said. The steps were well cared for. Apart from the secret surgery house, this was easily the nicest and best maintained building on the block. The view in, and therefore out of the windows, was unobstructed by curtains, and Preston could see 4 people in total sitting at a table, and they were playing cards? A chubby man sat facing the door. A revolver lay on the table next to him. The others, 2 men and a woman, appeared to be unarmed, but it was hard to tell. One was large, African-American, who looked like a lineman. Preston thought he even looked familiar. A white guy sat next to him, thinner than Preston was, but wiry. A woman had her back to the door, and he could tell little about her other than her gender. He pushed out a couple of deep breaths and knocked. Come in, a cheery voice answered. He wanted to look back, see where the men with him were, and make sure they were close enough in case he needed help. But he had to trust they were watching and could jump in when he needed them, because to look back would be to reveal their presence. If he could pull it off, he wanted those inside to think he was alone, at least at first. His heart hammered in his chest, the artery on his neck threatening to explode, but he wanted to try to make his eyes smaller, take a deep breath, and calm himself. Then he turned the knob and walked in. The first thing he saw was a revolver. The barrel looked like a tunnel with no light at the end of it. The second was the big linebacker. Undistorted by glass, Preston could read fear on his face, and that of the man next to him. We were just playing a game of Crazy Eights. Will you join us? Preston's jaw worked up and down, once, twice. A game of what? Crazy Eights. A quick hand before we conclude our business. Your business? Speaking of, the man said, why are you here? Well, Preston stammered and then heard noise behind him. The revolver barked, and something loudly responded right beside his ear. A ringing started that obliterated all other sound. But he felt something warm and sticky shower over that side of his body. It coated his face, painted the right side of his glasses crimson. The room turned red, dripped, and flowed as the revolver spoke again. His previous experience was repeated on his left side now, minus the answering report. Copper filled his sinuses. His open mouth caught some of the liquid. The taste, sweet at first, rapidly grew, and he gagged, realizing his mouth wasn't catching liquid from somewhere. It was filling with liquid, coming from where? Not wanting to, but needing to see, Preston reached up for his glasses with his left hand. He ripped them off his face and tossed them aside, and as he did, his fingers brushed his cheek, and then his teeth on that side. His teeth? He pulled his hand away, but he couldn't look down at it yet, because in front of him the impossible was happening. The man who had greeted him sat bolt upright. The revolver was on the table, pointing at no one. He was smiling. But the top half of his face was gone, whether through involuntary reflexes or because he was just alive enough to continue doing the only thing he knew how. He held a deck of cards in his right hand. With his left, he continuously dealt from it. Cards flew everywhere. The woman reached forward, grabbing a couple of cards and a note from the table. Preston stared for a moment longer. Then he felt the pain. Something was seriously wrong with the left side of his face. He turned to see if one of the 2 men with him would or could help. There were 2 bodies on the floor. One was missing the top of his head, much like the man dealing cards. The other was sprawled on one side, his shoulder hanging at an unnatural angle. Both men had their pistols in their hands, but would be no help to him. Preston fell to his knees. He tasted more blood. He would need serious help, and hoped the others at the table wouldn't kill him. But just in case, he reached for the leg of the man still moaning. Preston pushed up his pant leg and carefully pulled the knife from the sheath at the man's ankle. He held it loosely in his hand and turned. Of course, he hadn't heard the footsteps behind him. The ringing hadn't stopped, probably wouldn't for a while. The linebacker stood over him. The thin man flanked him. "What do we do with him?" the giant might have bellowed. Preston didn't know. He could only read his lips. The little man stepped forward. He raised a small pistol. "Wait!" He saw the words, saw the woman's face for the first time, and she turned to face him. "We can use him." "Use him?" he saw the lieutenant say as the little man lowered his weapon. "Yes, we're near a doctor's office, and this man needs medical attention." Preston breathed a sigh of relief and felt a mix of air and blood flow out the side of his cheek. He was in deep trouble here, but he might, if he played his cards right, live just a little longer. He felt himself sway, and he tried to hide the knife in his hand, but didn't know if he was successful. He just fell to one side. Balanced against the leg of one of the chairs next to the table was a single card, perhaps the last the dead dealer had tossed. He had no way of knowing, but the last thing he remembered before his eyes closed and he felt himself lifted by strangers' hands and propelled across the floor was the 7 of clubs. The memory of the card stayed in his mind on the inside of his eyelids. It floated with him out into a cool breeze that soothed his body and stung his face. The blackness swam and spun, but ever present in front of him, the card remained. Why? He asked. Then he saw it. As his mind turned the card this way and that, a green light glowed from inside it, and a small bend decorated one of the corners. He cried out, tried to make his voice heard. That card, it was important. Somehow he knew it. But he was able to tell no one. Ace was going to be so pissed. Thanks for listening to the Solitaire series, episode 36, the 7 of clubs. Next up, the 2 of hearts.